The night she vanished didn't scream danger. It whispered it. A college town breathing easy, streetlights humming like they always had, and a young woman stepping into the dark believing it would let her pass. Somewhere a camera blinked on. Somewhere a clock kept time. And somewhere beneath all of it a truth waited, patient, cold, and hungry, to be seen, and they would later say she was careful. Friends remember her double, checking doors, texting when she arrived, walking with purpose. She was the kind of person who survived by paying attention. That's what made the silence so loud when her phone stopped answering. No final message, no frantic call, just absence, expanding like a bruise across a campus that had learned to trust its routines. And at first the story followed a familiar script. A late night, a party that went on too long, a walk back that should have taken 10 minutes. Police searched the usual places, dorms, bars, wooded edges where secrets sometimes get lost. Flyers went up. Parents arrived with eyes already exhausted by fear. The town leaned in, telling itself this would end the way it always hopes to end. With relief. With apologies. With a girl found cold but breathing, wrapped in blankets and promises. But then there was the camera, and CCTV footage is supposed to be neutral. It doesn't panic, it doesn't guess, it simply remembers. Frame by frame, it preserves what human memory distorts. When investigators finally reviewed the footage from a building she passed that night, the story cracked, the timeline bent, the walk home became something else entirely, and she appears at the edge of the frame, steady, alone. Then a pause that lasts too long, a shadow that shouldn't be there, a movement that doesn't belong. The camera keeps watching as if it knows what we don't yet understand, that this moment will be replayed in courtrooms, on news screens, in the nightmares of those who loved her. And because once you see what the camera saw, you can't unsee it. And once you accept what it implies, the case stops being about a missing student and starts becoming a mirror, reflecting how thin the line is between safety and disappearance, and how easily a town's comforting story can rot from the inside. And when investigators slowed the footage down, they noticed what the eye misses at full speed. Not a face at first, not a weapon, just hesitation. She stops walking. It's subtle, one step that doesn't land with confidence. A shoulder turning as if she's heard her name spoken by someone she half recognizes. People who knew her would later say this was her instinct. Pause before danger, assess, decide. The camera catches her doing exactly that, and then someone enters the frame, and at first glance it looks ordinary, too ordinary. A figure moving with familiarity, not urgency, no struggle, no chase. That's what makes it unsettling. Predators don't always run, sometimes they stroll, because they know time is on their side. The two figures share the frame for less than 7 seconds, but those seconds stretch endlessly when replayed. She shifts her weight. The figure adjusts course. Their paths intersect, and the camera records a moment that would later fracture dozens of lives. And she turns away from the direction of her dorm, and this is where the story changes shape. Voluntary movement is comforting. It tells us there must have been consent, conversation, a choice. But trauma experts will tell you something else. You fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it complies. Sometimes it follows the path that feels least dangerous in the moment. The camera can't hear what was said, but it shows what matters. She doesn't look back and minutes pass. The figure exits the frame. She does not, and police rewatch it again and again, arguing over what they're seeing. Is this a friend? A classmate? Someone she trusted just enough to step off her path? The town begins to split along those questions. Parents warn their kids to walk in groups. Students lock doors they used to leave open. The campus starts learning a new language, one spoken in glances and suspicion. And then another camera is found. Different angle, different street, same night, and this one shows her again, but something has changed. Her posture is tighter, her pace uneven. The frame catches a detail investigators can't ignore. She's no longer alone, and the space between them has closed. The distance of choice has become the proximity of control. And from here on, every answer creates a darker question. Because if she wasn't taken by force, then whatever happened next was hidden in plain sight. And that is always the most terrifying kind of disappearance. And the third camera doesn't belong to the campus. It belongs to a convenience store 2 blocks off the map students think they know. The kind of place you only notice when you need something quickly. Light spilling onto cracked pavement, a buzzing sign that never quite works. This camera doesn't care about reputations or safety reports. It records what passes beneath it without mercy. And she enters the frame at 1:47 a.m. and what strikes investigators first is how small she looks now. Not physically smaller, but diminished. Her shoulders are hunched, her steps shortened, as if the night itself has grown heavier. She pauses at the edge of the light, and for a moment, just one, her face tilts upward. The resolution is poor, but that tilt becomes infamous. Analysts argue over it for years. Is she scanning for help? Is she calculating escape? Or is she already realizing something irreversible has begun, and the second figure follows her into the glow? And this time, there is no doubt they are together. The space between them is tight enough to erase coincidence. He stands slightly behind her, angled in a way that suggests direction without touch, control without hands. Anyone who has studied coercion recognizes it immediately. This isn't a stranger grabbing in the dark. This is someone guiding an outcome, and she doesn't go inside the store. And that detail haunts people. A door was right there. Light, witnesses, cameras, safety, all within a few steps. But trauma doesn't measure options the way observers do. In moments like this, the brain narrows the world to survival, and survival often means not escalating, not resisting, not choosing the action that might provoke something worse. The camera captures her turning away from safety, and in doing so, it captures a truth many don't want to accept. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the one you're already in, and they leave the frame together. The timestamp keeps running. And from that moment on, the trail thins. No more cameras, no more sightings, just a growing absence that spreads from her dorm room to her family home, from a missing poster to a national headline. Investigators canvass the area, retracing steps already burned into their minds by footage they can't forget. Dogs lose the scent near a service road that leads away from town, toward land few students ever walk. And then that's when the case stops feeling random, and because patterns begin to emerge, not just about that night, but about others. Women who felt watched, paths that seemed safe until they weren't, a town that had learned how to look normal while hiding what it didn't want named. The CCTV didn't just show where she went, it exposed how many blind spots had been ignored for years. And then once those blind spots are seen, they start pointing somewhere specific. And as the investigation deepened, the town began to recognize itself in uncomfortable ways. This wasn't the first close call. It was simply the first one caught on enough cameras to make denial impossible. Detectives pulled reports from the past 5 years, incidents brushed off as misunderstandings, drunken confusion, bad decisions. A girl followed but not touched. Another who changed routes because someone matched her steps too closely. Stories that never made headlines because nothing officially happened, and until now. And the man in the footage became less of a mystery and more of a presence. Someone who understood the rhythm of the town. Someone who knew which streets went unwatched after midnight, which shortcuts felt safe, which lights flickered just enough to be useless. He wasn't hunting randomly. He was operating inside a system that had trained people not to see him, and police worked quietly at first. They showed still frames to store clerks, campus staff, maintenance workers. Faces leaned in, squinted, shook heads, but something strange kept happening. People hesitated before answering. A pause, a tightening of the mouth, as if recognition came paired with fear or loyalty. And because when the name finally surfaced, it didn't belong to a stranger drifting in from the dark. It belonged to someone threaded into the town's daily life. Not famous, not powerful, just familiar enough to blend in. The kind of person you pass without memory, which is often the most dangerous kind, and searches widened fields, drainage areas, abandoned structures left behind by expansion. Each day without answers sharpened the grief, turning hope into something brittle. Her family spoke in careful sentences, clinging to the possibility that the footage didn't tell the whole story. That maybe there was another camera, another angle, a moment still hidden that would change everything. But the evidence didn't soften. It narrowed, and investigators began to understand that the night she disappeared wasn't about impulse. It was about opportunity layered over patience, about someone who had watched long enough to know when to act. And the town, forced to confront itself, realized something even more unsettling. That safety had been a story they told themselves, not a reality they protected. And because once a place learns to ignore its own warning signs, it doesn't just fail one person. It prepares the ground for what comes next. And by the 5th week, the case stopped feeling like an investigation and started feeling like an excavation, not of land but of memory. Old rumors resurfaced, forgotten warnings passed between women in dorm rooms, texts sent late at night that said nothing specific and everything important. Avoid that street. Don't walk alone after bars close. If you see him, don't engage. No one could remember who started saying it. That was the problem. And detectives finally brought the man in for questioning. Not in handcuffs, not with sirens. Quietly, respectfully. The kind of approach reserved for someone who still benefits from the presumption of normalcy. He sat across the table calm enough to be rehearsed, answering questions with the ease of someone who had practiced being believed. He acknowledged the footage. Didn't deny being there. Just reframed it. A conversation. A misunderstanding, a decision she made on her own, and this is where the case turns inward. And because the question was no longer what happened to her, it was how easily the system leaned toward his version of events. How quickly doubt found its way into the narrative about a girl who could no longer speak for herself. Investigators noticed it. So did the family. The subtle shift in language, the way certainty dissolved into speculation the moment accountability drew close. And then a search warrant was executed. And what they found wasn't dramatic in the way movies prepare us for. No blood-soaked rooms, no trophies on display, just traces, fibers where they shouldn't be, a digital footprint that placed him in places he claimed never to be, and one item, small, ordinary, unmistakably hers, where it had no innocent reason to exist. And that was the moment the case stopped belonging to the town and started belonging to the country. And because now the question wasn't whether something terrible happened. It was how long it had been allowed to happen without consequence. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? And the footage, the silence, the hesitation of witnesses, it all began to form a single shape. Not a monster hiding in the woods, but a pattern hiding in plain sight. And patterns once exposed don't just explain the past, they warn the future, and the arrest didn't bring relief. It brought a different kind of fear. The kind that settles in after the adrenaline fades, when people start replaying their own lives against the timeline of what almost happened. The man's name spread quickly, but it landed unevenly. Some people were shocked. Others weren't surprised at all. A few admitted, quietly, that they'd always felt something was off but never trusted that feeling enough to act on it. And that's how these stories survived for so long, not through ignorance, but through hesitation. And as prosecutors built their case, the CCTV footage became a kind of public scripture, played in court, analyzed on television, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected by strangers who would never know her voice. Each frame was treated like a confession, even though cameras don't explain motives. They only reveal opportunities. An opportunity, in this case, had been shaped by a culture that taught women to accommodate discomfort rather than confront it, and her absence began to speak louder than any testimony, and her dorm room remained untouched for months. A half-folded jacket, notes from classes she never finished. Friends described dreaming about her, always in crowds, always just out of reach. Her parents learned a new vocabulary, legal terms, procedural delays, the measured language of people trained not to feel too much in front of grief. And then still, one question refused to settle. And why didn't anyone stop it? And because when you trace the story backward past the cameras and the suspect past the night itself, you find something older. A long history of near misses quietly absorbed by the town. Warnings that were passed person to person instead of addressed openly. Safety treated as a personal responsibility instead of a collective one. And the case forced a reckoning, not just with what one man did, but with what everyone else allowed. Because disappearance doesn't begin with a single act. It begins with a pattern of silence, reinforced until it feels normal, and that is the most dangerous inheritance a place can leave behind. And years later, people still argue about the details, about timelines and motives and whether the cameras told the whole truth. But the arguments miss what this story became. It was never only about a missing college girl. It was about what the footage forced into the light, and what could no longer be buried once it was seen. And the town changed, at least on the surface. More lighting, more patrols, new safety campaigns printed on glossy paper. Administrators promised vigilance. But those who lived there knew the deeper shift was quieter. Trust didn't return the way it left. People learned how easily normal can fracture, how thin the boundary is between an ordinary night and a permanent absence, and her name became a reference point, a warning spoken softly to new students. A pause in conversation when walking past the places caught on camera. She was remembered not just as a victim but as evidence. Proof that danger doesn't always announce itself, and that evil doesn't always look unfamiliar. And what the CCTV ultimately revealed wasn't just a crime. It revealed a structure. A system of habits and silences that allowed one person to believe he could act without consequence. And for a time he was right. Not because no one knew, but because knowing didn't feel actionable. Because discomfort was easier to manage than confrontation. And this is how history repeats itself, not through grand catastrophes, but through small decisions to look away. And some nights, long after the case faded from headlines, the cameras are still there, still recording, still waiting. They hum quietly above empty streets, capturing moments no one thinks will matter, until they do. Until another pause, another shadow, another choice becomes the center of a story no one wanted to tell. And then somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the asphalt and the reassurance and the carefully worded promises, the past remains awake, watching, remembering, ready to surface the next time we mistake familiarity for safety and silence for peace. And because the truth is never really hidden, it's just patient,